You are here because thinking harder did not help. You replayed the options, weighed the consequences, imagined every possible future, and still nothing feels right. The mind is loud, restless, searching for certainty, while the body carries a quiet tension that never fully leaves. This is not confusion because you lack intelligence or faith. This is confusion because you reach the limit of control. There is a moment in every life where effort stops producing clarity and starts producing noise. That moment feels frightening because we were taught that answers come from pushing, analyzing, and deciding faster. Yet wisdom follows a different logic. When the brain is under pressure, it does not search for truth, it searches for relief. Neuroscience shows that stress narrows perception and pushes the mind toward shortcuts that feel urgent but are rarely wise. This is why the most important decisions are often made in the worst internal states. Prayer, in moments like this, is often misunderstood. People try to use it to escape uncertainty instead of entering it with clarity. But wisdom does not appear when the mind is frantic. It appears when the internal environment becomes stable enough to receive it. This video is not about finding an answer immediately. It is about changing the state from which answers emerge. You are not broken. You are overloaded. And the path forward begins not with knowing what to do next, but with understanding why you cannot know it yet. That understanding alone starts to calm the system, creating the first opening where wisdom can breathe. The silent crossroad where logic breaks down. There is a precise and unmistakable moment when logic stops being a tool and becomes a burden. It happens quietly. You sit with the decision, tell yourself you will think it through one more time, and instead of clarity you feel heavier. Thoughts repeat themselves, arguments circle back, the same conclusions appear, disappear, and return without resolution. This is the silent crossroad most people never learn to recognize. They assume the problem is a lack of effort, so they push harder. But what is actually happening is cognitive saturation. From a psychological perspective, the brain has limits. When those limits are exceeded, reasoning does not improve, it degrades. Judgment becomes rigid, attention narrows, emotional signals become distorted. What feels like careful thinking is often rumination in disguise. Judith Beck's work in cognitive therapy shows that when thoughts lose flexibility, insight collapses. You are no longer exploring reality, you are trapped inside it. This is why intelligent, reflective people can feel completely lost at pivotal moments. Their strength becomes the very thing exhausting the system. Descartes understood something essential here. Doubt is not a failure of reason, but a boundary marker. It tells you that the current method of knowing has reached its edge. Modern neuroscience echoes this insight. When working memory is overloaded, the prefrontal cortex struggles to integrate information. The body responds with tension, restlessness, and subtle alarm. That resistance you feel is not irrational. It is information. It is the nervous system saying that more thinking will not produce more truth. This crossroad is uncomfortable because it challenges identity. If you believe you must always know, decide, and control, this moment feels like collapse. But wisdom does not emerge from constant certainty. Aristotle spoke of practical wisdom as the ability to perceive rightly in complex situations, not to calculate endlessly. Perception requires space, and space only appears when effort pauses. Prayer becomes relevant precisely here, not as a demand for answers, but as an interruption of the loop. When logic breaks down, something else is being invited forward. The mistake most people make is assuming they must fix the confusion before approaching prayer. In reality, this is the exact state where prayer begins to matter. Not because confusion is holy, but because it humbles the mind enough to stop pretending it already knows. If you miss this crossroad, you will rush past it. You will force a decision simply to end the discomfort. And relief will feel like wisdom, even when it is not. But if you recognize it, if you pause without judgment, something subtle happens. The pressure softens. The urgency loosens its grip. You stop demanding clarity from a system that is temporarily incapable of providing it. That pause is not inactivity, it is alignment. This is where discernment starts to rebuild, not through effort, but through recalibration. The mind begins to rest, the body exhales, and only then does the deeper work begin. Because before wisdom can answer you, it must first find you quiet enough to listen. Why the brain mistakes urgency for truth. Urgency has a voice that sounds convincing. It speaks fast, with confidence, and often feels like clarity. When you are under pressure, the brain does not ask what is true. It asks what will end the discomfort fastest. This is one of the most misunderstood experiences in decision-making. People believe they suddenly became certain, when in reality their nervous system simply reached a threshold and demanded resolution. What feels like insight is often just the body trying to escape tension. From a neurological standpoint, urgency activates survival circuits. Stress hormones increase, attention narrows, and the brain shifts from reflective processing to rapid pattern matching. Andrew Huberman explains that in these states, the prefrontal cortex loses influence, while older, faster systems take over. These systems are excellent for immediate danger, but terrible for complex life decisions. They favor speed over accuracy, action over discernment. This is why urgent clarity feels powerful but fragile. It collapses the moment consequences appear. Psychologically, this creates a dangerous illusion. The mind interprets intensity as importance. The louder a thought feels, the more true it seems. Cognitive behavioral research shows that emotionally charged thoughts are often mistaken for facts. Judith Beck emphasized that thoughts generated under stress feel absolute, even when they are distorted. The brain does not label them as temporary reactions, it presents them as conclusions. This is how urgency disguises itself as wisdom. You can see this pattern clearly in hindsight. Decisions made in panic often come with a story of certainty. You remember saying, "This is it, I just knew." But what you knew was not direction, it was relief. Relief from waiting, from not knowing, from carrying tension. The problem is that relief fades and reality remains. When it does, doubt returns stronger, often accompanied by regret. Prayer is frequently pulled into this dynamic. People pray from urgency, asking for confirmation of what they already feel pressured to do. They interpret emotional intensity as spiritual alignment, but prayer offered in a stressed state does not bring wisdom. It amplifies bias. The mind listens only for echoes of its own urgency. Silence feels unbearable, so any impulse feels like an answer. Stoic philosophy warned against this long before neuroscience existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the danger of acting while disturbed, reminding himself to return to calm before judgment. Calm was not passivity, it was clarity. Without it, perception becomes unreliable. Modern science simply explains the mechanism behind this ancient insight. A regulated nervous system sees more accurately. Understanding this changes everything. When urgency appears, it is no longer a command. It becomes a signal. Not a signal to act, but a signal to pause. The presence of urgency tells you that wisdom is temporarily inaccessible, not because it is absent, but because the internal conditions are wrong. Just as you would not trust your vision in thick fog, you cannot trust discernment under emotional pressure. This is where prayer must change form. Instead of asking what to do, prayer becomes an act of slowing the system down. Breathing steadies, attention softens. The body begins to exit survival mode. Only then does urgency lose its authority. Only then can truth separate itself from impulse. The next layer is subtle but crucial. If urgency is the brain seeking relief, then stillness is the brain regaining perspective. And perspective is the soil where wisdom grows. Until you understand this, urgency will keep masquerading as guidance. Once you see it clearly, you stop obeying its voice. You begin listening for something quieter, steadier, and far more reliable. The inner noise that blocks discernment. When urgency quiets down, something else becomes noticeable. Not silence, but noise. A dense internal crowd made of opinions, memories, expectations, and imagined outcomes all speaking at once. This is where many people assume they are failing spiritually or mentally, because instead of answers, they encounter even more mental activity. But this noise did not appear because you stopped thinking correctly. It was always there. You simply became aware of it. Modern psychology explains this as cognitive interference. The mind is rarely dealing with one question at a time. It is processing unresolved emotions from the past, borrowed beliefs from family and culture, fear of repeating old mistakes, and pressure to become a future version of yourself that feels acceptable. Each of these carries its own narrative. None of them are neutral. Each wants control. When they overlap, discernment becomes impossible, not because wisdom is absent, but because it is drowned out. Michel de Montaigne wrote that most of our suffering comes not from things themselves, but from the stories we tell about them. This inner noise is made of stories. Stories about who you should be by now. Stories about what choosing wrong would mean about you. Stories about what others expect. These narratives feel personal, but many of them are inherited, absorbed unconsciously over years. When you try to decide from inside this storm, you are not choosing freely. You are negotiating with ghosts. Cognitive behavioral therapy reveals something crucial here. Thoughts are not commands, they are mental events. But when many appear at once, they feel authoritative. Judith Beck emphasized the importance of distancing from thought content in order to regain flexibility. Discernment requires space between awareness and narrative. Without that space, every thought demands action, and the loudest ones win, not the wisest. Prayer is often misunderstood at this stage. People expect prayer to silence the mind instantly. When it does not, they assume they are doing it wrong. In reality, prayer first exposes the noise before it quiets it. Just like stepping into a dark room makes you aware of the clutter, turning inward reveals what has been shaping your decisions without your consent. Neuroscience supports this process. When attention turns inward, default mode networks activate, bringing self-referential thoughts to the surface. This can feel uncomfortable, even overwhelming. But it is not regression, it is disclosure. You cannot discern clearly what you refuse to see. Wisdom does not bypass complexity, it organizes it. This is why silence is not emptiness. Silence is access. It is the space where thoughts can be observed instead of obeyed. Stoic practice involved learning to notice impressions before assenting to them. Not every impression deserved agreement. The same applies here. Inner noise loses power when it is seen as noise, not truth. As this awareness grows, something subtle shifts. The mind begins to slow not because it is forced to, but because it no longer needs to defend every thought. Emotional charge decreases, attention stabilizes. You stop asking which voice is right and start noticing which voices are reactive. That distinction changes how you listen. This chapter is not about achieving silence, it is about understanding interference. Once you recognize that confusion is often the result of too many unexamined narratives competing for control, you stop blaming yourself. And when blame dissolves, discernment becomes possible again, because wisdom does not shout over the noise, it waits until the noise is understood. Prayer as a state change, not a question. Most people approach prayer the way they approach a problem. They come with a question, an urgency, a desired outcome, and an unspoken demand for resolution. What should I do? Which path is right? Show me the answer. When nothing clear appears, frustration grows and silence feels like absence. But prayer was never designed to function as an interrogation. It is not a method for extracting information from the unknown. It is a way of reorganizing the inner state so that wisdom can become perceptible. From a psychological perspective, the quality of any insight depends on the state of the mind receiving it. A dysregulated nervous system cannot interpret subtle information accurately. Andrew Huberman explains that when stress is high, perception becomes rigid and biased toward threat reduction. In that condition, even if guidance were present, it would be filtered through fear. This is why prayer that begins in panic rarely produces clarity. It simply amplifies whatever the mind is already clinging to. Prayer as a state change begins differently. It does not start with asking. It starts with allowing the body to slow down, allowing breath to deepen, allowing the mind to stop rehearsing futures it cannot control. This is not passive. It is intentional regulation. When attention settles and emotional arousal decreases, the brain shifts from survival mode to integration mode. This is the state where perspective returns. Judith Beck's work highlights that cognitive flexibility increases when emotional intensity drops. Thoughts become less absolute. Possibilities reappear. This is not mystical, it is neurological. Prayer, in this sense, functions like a bridge between emotional regulation and meaning-making. It prepares the terrain. Only after the terrain is prepared does wisdom have somewhere to land. Philosophically, this aligns with Descartes' insistence on clarity as the foundation of truth. Clarity does not come from force, it comes from removing what distorts perception. Prayer is the act of clearing the lens. It is less about speaking and more about seeing. When the internal posture shifts from demand to receptivity, the quality of awareness changes. Many people resist this because it feels unproductive. The mind wants movement. It wants conclusions. But wisdom is not produced on command. Aristotle understood that practical wisdom emerges from attunement, not speed. It requires being in the right condition to perceive what matters. Prayer cultivates that condition. As the state changes, something noticeable happens. The urgency that once dominated begins to lose authority. The inner noise no longer competes as aggressively. Attention becomes steadier. You are not closer to an answer yet, but you are closer to yourself. And that proximity matters more than most people realize. You cannot hear guidance while being internally fragmented. This is where prayer stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like alignment. Not alignment with a specific outcome, but alignment within. When inner conflict softens, coherence emerges. And coherence is the doorway through which discernment enters. The mistake is believing that prayer should immediately resolve uncertainty. Its first function is not to decide for you. It is to return you to a state where deciding wisely becomes possible. Once that is understood, prayer no longer feels silent. It feels stabilizing. And in that stability, something deeper begins to form. Something that does not rush, does not shout, and does not need to prove itself. The courage to admit, I don't know. There is a moment in prayer that feels almost uncomfortable. A moment when the mind reaches for words and finds none that sound confident. This is usually where people retreat. They replace honesty with familiar phrases, certainty with repetition. But wisdom begins precisely where performance ends. Admitting I don't know is not weakness. It is one of the most cognitively and emotionally mature positions a person can take. From a psychological standpoint, certainty is often a defense. The ego prefers a wrong answer over no answer because uncertainty threatens identity. Judith Beck observed that rigid beliefs are often maintained not because they are true, but because they reduce anxiety. Saying I don't know removes that protection. It exposes the nervous system, and that exposure paradoxically is what allows regulation to deepen. Neuroscience helps explain why this admission is powerful. When you stop pretending to know, the brain exits problem-solving mode and enters exploratory mode. Stress hormones decrease, curiosity increases, attention widens. This shift is essential for insight. Andrew Huberman describes how openness and reduced threat perception allow the brain to integrate information more broadly. Wisdom cannot emerge in a mind that is defending an image of certainty. Spiritually, this moment represents humility, but not humiliation. It is an honest alignment with reality. Descartes began his search for truth by doubting everything he could not clearly know. He did not treat doubt as an enemy, but as a doorway. Saying, I don't know, is not the end of knowing. It is the clearing that makes knowing possible. In prayer, this admission changes the entire dynamic. You are no longer asking for confirmation of your ideas. You are no longer negotiating outcomes. You are simply present with the truth of your inner state. That presence is stabilizing. It removes internal contradiction. When the mind stops pretending, the body relaxes. When the body relaxes, perception sharpens. Many people fear that admitting uncertainty will leave them directionless. In reality, false certainty is what leads to confusion. Stoic philosophy emphasized acting in accordance with reality, not with desire or fear. Reality in this moment is not knowing. Aligning with that reality creates coherence, and coherence is the foundation of trust. Something subtle happens when you allow this not knowing to exist without rushing to fill it. The mind stops grasping. The emotional charge softens. Instead of searching for the next step, you begin to feel grounded in the present one. This does not produce answers immediately. It produces stability, and stability is far more valuable than premature clarity. This is why wisdom often arrives after surrender, not before it. Surrender here does not mean giving up responsibility. It means releasing the illusion that control equals insight. When you stop forcing the future to reveal itself, the present becomes clearer. And in that clarity, the next step eventually reveals itself without pressure. Admitting "I don't know" is not the collapse of faith. It is the restoration of honesty. And honesty is what allows wisdom to trust you enough to speak. How the body recognizes wisdom before the mind. Before a thought becomes clear, the body already knows. This is something most people were never taught to trust. They were trained to believe that wisdom is a mental event, a conclusion reached through reasoning or revelation. Yet long before the mind forms language, the nervous system registers alignment or resistance. This is not intuition in a mystical sense. It is perception rooted in physiology. Neuroscience shows that the body continuously evaluates safety, coherence, and direction. When a choice is misaligned, the body often responds with tension, constriction, shallow breathing, or restlessness. When a choice is wise, even if it is difficult, the body tends to soften. Breathing deepens, muscles release. There is a sense of grounded alertness rather than agitation. Andrew Huberman explains that this reflects autonomic balance. The nervous system moves out of threat response and into a state where integration and learning are possible. Most people ignore these signals because they are subtle. They expect wisdom to feel dramatic or emotionally charged, but emotional charge is often just arousal, not clarity. The body's recognition of wisdom is quiet. It does not rush. It does not demand. It feels stable. This is why people often say, looking back, "I didn't feel right about it," even though it made sense at the time. The body noticed what the mind rationalized away. Judith Beck's work reinforces this connection. Emotional and physical responses often reveal underlying beliefs before conscious awareness catches up. When you pay attention to bodily signals, you gain access to information that has not yet been distorted by narrative. The body does not argue. It responds. Learning to listen to it is a skill, not a talent. Prayer deepens this awareness when it is practiced as presence rather than performance. As the mind quiets, bodily sensations become clearer. You notice where there is tightness, where there is ease, where energy flows and where it stalls. This is not about chasing comfort. Wise decisions are not always comfortable, but they are coherent. The body recognizes coherence even in difficulty. Stoic thinkers understood this implicitly. They spoke of living in accordance with nature, not just external nature, but internal order. When actions align with reason and virtue, inner conflict decreases. Modern physiology simply gives language to this ancient observation. Inner conflict manifests physically. Inner alignment restores balance. This does not mean the body replaces the mind. It complements it. Wisdom emerges when cognition and physiology are in dialogue. When the mind listens without dominating, the body informs without overwhelming. Together, they create discernment that feels steady rather than reactive. Many people miss this because they are waiting for certainty. The body does not offer certainty. It offers direction. It tells you when you are forcing, when you are avoiding, when you are aligned. These signals are available long before answers are. Learning to respect them changes how you move through uncertainty. You stop demanding that the future explain itself and start trusting the present to guide you. When wisdom begins to form, it often announces itself as a sense of rightness that does not need justification, not excitement, not relief. Just a quiet internal yes. This yes does not shout. It does not argue. It simply remains. And the body recognizes it before the mind dares to believe it. The difference between peace and excitement. One of the most common mistakes people make when seeking guidance is confusing emotional intensity with confirmation. Excitement feels alive. It feels motivating. It feels like movement. Peace, on the other hand, can feel almost anticlimactic. Quiet, subtle, easily overlooked. Yet these two states come from very different systems in the brain, and understanding the difference can prevent years of misaligned decisions. Excitement is driven by anticipation and reward prediction. Dopamine increases, attention locks onto possibility, and the mind fills in gaps with imagined outcomes. Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine does not signal fulfillment, it signals pursuit. It energizes action, but it does not evaluate truth. This is why excitement can feel compelling even when it leads toward instability. It pushes forward without asking whether the direction is sustainable. Peace operates differently. It is not a surge, but a settling. The nervous system shifts into a state of coherence. Breathing becomes slower and fuller. The body feels grounded rather than elevated. There is clarity without urgency. Peace does not demand action. It allows it. This is why peace is often mistaken for indecision. It lacks the drama the mind expects from certainty. Psychologically, excitement narrows focus. It highlights potential gains and minimizes risk. Peace widens perspective. It allows consequences to be seen without distortion. Judith Beck emphasized that emotionally neutral states are often the most reliable for accurate appraisal. When emotion spikes, thinking becomes biased. When emotion stabilizes, discernment improves. Many people pray and wait for a feeling that confirms their desire. When excitement appears, they assume it is guidance. But prayer that leads to wisdom often produces calm before direction. This calm can feel uncomfortable because it removes the emotional push that justified urgency. Without that push, the ego feels exposed. It wants something to hold on to. Peace offers nothing to grasp, only something to rest in. Stoic philosophy valued tranquility not as indifference, but as clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind should be like a calm river, not because nothing is happening, but because it flows without resistance. Peace allows movement without distortion. Excitement often distorts movement by tying it to expectation. This distinction becomes clear over time. Excitement fades quickly. It needs to be renewed. Peace endures. It remains even when circumstances are difficult. A wise decision may involve sacrifice, effort, or loss, but it carries an undercurrent of rightness that does not disappear when emotions fluctuate. Learning to notice this difference changes how you interpret your inner experience. You stop chasing the feeling that urges you forward and start listening for the state that holds you steady. This does not mean rejecting excitement altogether. It means not confusing it with wisdom. When peace is present, even uncertainty feels manageable. You may not know the full path, but you trust the ground beneath your feet. That trust does not come from enthusiasm. It comes from alignment, and alignment rarely announces itself loudly. Understanding this protects you from impulsive decisions that feel inspired but leave you unsettled later. It teaches you to wait for the signal that does not pressure you, that does not rush you, that does not demand belief. Peace simply invites you to walk, one step at a time without fear of the ground giving way. Trusting the pause when answers don't come yet. There is a particular discomfort that appears when you have done everything you know how to do and clarity still has not arrived. The mind interprets this pause as failure. It whispers that you are wasting time, missing opportunities, falling behind. But this interpretation comes from a culture that confuses movement with progress. Wisdom does not operate on urgency. It operates on readiness. From a neurobiological perspective, integration takes time. Insight is not downloaded instantly. It forms as the brain reorganizes information beneath conscious awareness. Andrew Huberman explains that learning and insight often occur after periods of rest, not during effort. When you stop forcing resolution, the brain continues working quietly, connecting patterns, dissolving distortions, recalibrating perception. The pause is not empty. It is active at a level you cannot consciously control. Psychologically, impatience is often a reaction to uncertainty, not a response to reality. Judith Beck emphasized that intolerance of uncertainty fuels anxiety-driven behavior. When answers do not come quickly, people act to relieve discomfort rather than to align with truth. This is how regret is created, not because the choice was wrong, but because it was premature. Prayer in this phase requires a different kind of trust. Not trust that an answer will appear on your timeline, but trust that waiting is not abandonment. This is difficult because the ego equates waiting with helplessness. Yet Stoic philosophy viewed restraint as strength. Seneca wrote that no wind is favorable to the sailor who does not know where to go. Waiting clarifies direction by preventing unnecessary movement. This pause protects you. It prevents you from committing to paths that feel convincing, but are built on incomplete perception. It gives emotions time to settle so they do not masquerade as guidance. It allows motivations to reveal themselves honestly. When you remain present in the pause without forcing meaning, inner coherence deepens. Many people fear that if they do not act, nothing will happen. In reality, acting too soon often delays what is meant to unfold. Wisdom matures. It does not rush to meet demand. When the internal state becomes stable enough, clarity often arrives naturally, sometimes in unexpected ways, sometimes quietly, without announcement. Trusting the pause changes your relationship with uncertainty. You stop seeing it as an enemy and start seeing it as a signal that something is still forming. This trust reduces anxiety, restores self-respect, and prevents the erosion of confidence that comes from repeated impulsive decisions. The pause is not a test of faith. It is a refinement of perception, and those who learn to remain steady here develop a kind of inner authority that cannot be shaken by delay. When wisdom finally speaks, it changes how you walk forward. Wisdom rarely arrives as a dramatic revelation. More often it enters quietly, almost unnoticed, like a shift in posture rather than a new thought. You do not suddenly know everything. You simply know enough to take the next step without inner conflict. The urgency that once dominated is gone. The noise has settled. What remains is a grounded sense of direction that does not need constant reassurance. Psychologically, this reflects integration. The mind, emotions, and body are no longer pulling in different directions. Judith Beck described this as cognitive coherence, a state where beliefs, feelings, and actions align without force. Decisions made from this state feel steady, even when they are challenging. Doubt may still appear, but it no longer controls behavior. You trust yourself enough to move. From a neurological perspective, this is what regulation looks like in action. The nervous system is balanced. Attention is flexible. The brain is not chasing relief or avoiding discomfort. Andrew Huberman explains that in regulated states, perception becomes more accurate and learning accelerates. Wisdom feels quiet because it does not need to defend itself against internal chaos. Philosophically, this is the moment Descartes sought, not absolute certainty, but clarity sufficient for action. Aristotle would call this practical wisdom, the ability to act rightly in complex circumstances without needing perfect knowledge. Stoics would recognize it as inner freedom, the capacity to move forward without being ruled by fear or desire. What changes most is not the situation, but your relationship to it. You stop obsessing over outcomes. You stop rehearsing explanations. You walk forward with a calm authority that comes from alignment rather than control. This is why wisdom often feels like peace in motion. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It removes resistance to it. Prayer, in this sense, has done its work, not by giving you a script, but by reshaping the internal conditions from which action emerges. You are no longer asking for signs. You are responding to clarity. Even if the path unfolds slowly, each step feels grounded. This is the quiet confidence that sustains resilience. Not confidence in results, but confidence in perception. You trust that if something feels misaligned, you will notice. If adjustment is needed, you will respond. This trust dissolves the fear of choosing wrong, because you know you are no longer choosing blindly. Wisdom does not promise ease. It promises integrity. And integrity changes how you move through every decision that follows. When you learn to pray for wisdom in this way, you're no longer waiting for life to tell you what to do. You are becoming someone who can listen, discern, and walk forward with steadiness, even when the road ahead is not fully visible.